Mangmei Leng, also known as Michelle, was born on January 29, 1991, in Chengdu, Sichuan Province, China. She grew up in a loving and supportive family, with her parents providing her with the best education and upbringing. Michelle was a bright and ambitious girl, excelling in her studies and always showing respect and kindness toward others. However, tragedy struck in 2008 when a devastating earthquake hit Sichuan, resulting in the loss of her father. The grief was overwhelming, but Michelle found strength in her mother, Mei Jiang-el, who encouraged her to focus on her future. Despite the hardships, she remained determined to achieve her dreams and bring honor to her family. Michelle's mother believed that studying abroad would give her daughter better opportunities, so she supported Michelle's plan to pursue higher education in Australia. In 2011, Michelle moved to Sydney and enrolled at the University of Technology, fulfilling her lifelong ambition. Adjusting to a new country was challenging, but Michelle quickly adapted to the lifestyle. She moved in with her aunt, who had been living in Australia for years, along with her teenage daughter, who was 2 years younger than Michelle. Their home was in Campsie, a suburban area of New South Wales. Living with her aunt and cousin made Michelle feel less homesick, and she worked hard to balance her studies and part-time work while staying connected with her family back in China. In 2012, Michelle's aunt married a much younger man named Derek Barrett, a 24-year-old unemployed IT worker. This significant age gap raised eyebrows among their acquaintances, but Michelle didn't interfere in her aunt's personal decisions. Derek soon moved into the house with Michelle, her aunt, and her cousin. Initially, everything seemed normal, and Michelle continued focusing on her education and work. Derek appeared to be a quiet and reserved person, not engaging much with Michelle or the rest of the family. However, there were underlying tensions in the household that Michelle might not have noticed at the time. By 2016, Michelle was close to finishing her studies and had started making plans for her future. She maintained an active social life, often meeting with friends, but was also dedicated to her responsibilities. Her aunt's work required frequent travel to Wollongong, leaving Michelle, her cousin, and Derek alone in the house for days at a time. Despite her busy schedule, Michelle always kept in touch with her family in China, regularly updating them about her life. However, she was unaware that she was being watched closely by someone in the house. Derek's behavior had become more unsettling, but Michelle, trusting her family environment, had no reason to suspect any danger. On April 22, 2016, Michelle spent the day shopping in Sydney's central business district, enjoying time with her friends. Surveillance cameras captured her last public moments as she made her way back home via train, arriving at Campsie Station around 4:30 p.m. That evening, she remained active on social media and exchanged messages with friends and family. Everything seemed perfectly normal, with no indication that anything was wrong. However, after that night, Michelle went completely silent. She did not respond to messages, did not show up for work, and her phone remained off. Unbeknownst to anyone, something terrible had happened inside the house that night. An act of unimaginable violence that would later shock everyone who knew her. On April 24, 2016, Michelle's aunt returned home from her business trip and immediately noticed something was wrong. Michelle was nowhere to be found, and her phone had been turned off for days. This was completely out of character for her, as she always kept in touch with her mother and friends. When she checked Michelle's room, everything was in perfect order, with all her belongings still there. There were no signs that she had packed or left voluntarily. Concerned about her niece's sudden disappearance, Michelle's aunt questioned Derek, who claimed he hadn't seen Michelle for 2 days. He suggested that she had been spending a lot of time out with friends, possibly even staying overnight elsewhere. However, Michelle's aunt wasn't convinced. She knew Michelle was responsible and would never disappear without telling someone. After checking Michelle's social media and noticing she hadn't been online, she became even more worried. That same day, she and Derek went to the police station to report Michelle missing. While Michelle's disappearance was being reported, an unrelated but tragic discovery had already taken place earlier that morning. Around 10:30 a.m. on April 24th, multiple people called the police after spotting a body floating in the water near Snapper Point, a rocky coastal area about 80 miles from Campsie. Authorities arrived and recovered the body of a young woman of Asian descent. The news quickly spread through Australian media, but at that time, the victim remained unidentified. The police treated the case as suspicious and set up a crime scene at Snapper Point. Detective Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin, who was leading the investigation, stated that officers were reviewing security camera footage and canvassing the area to determine how the woman had ended up there. After receiving the missing person report, police compared the details with the body found at Snapper Point. Unfortunately, it didn't take long to confirm that the victim was Michelle. The news devastated her family, both in Australia and China. Her mother, Mei Jong-el, was heartbroken upon hearing that her daughter's life had been brutally taken in a country she had once believed to be safe. As the investigation continued, the shocking truth began to unravel. Michelle had suffered a horrifying fate. The autopsy revealed that she had been subjected to a brutal attack before her death. She had over 30 stab wounds on her body, defensive wounds on her arms, and evidence suggested she had fought desperately for her life. Detectives quickly realized that this was not a random crime, but a calculated and gruesome act. Now, they had to determine who was responsible, and the evidence would soon point to someone shockingly close to Michelle. As detectives dove into the case, their primary goal was to piece together the events leading up to Michelle's murder. The first step was to analyze her last known movements and interactions. They obtained CCTV footage from various locations Michelle had visited on April 21, 2016. The footage showed her in the Sydney Central Business District, shopping alone and appearing perfectly fine. She later boarded a train at St. James Railway Station and arrived at Campsie Railway Station at around 4:30 p.m. This was the last known sighting of Michelle alive. Further investigations into her phone records indicated that Michelle had been in communication with friends and family that evening, and none of them sensed anything unusual in her behavior. However, her phone activity stopped abruptly after midnight on April 21st. This raised serious concerns. It was highly unusual for Michelle to be unresponsive for such a long time. As part of their inquiries, detectives interviewed Michelle's aunt, her cousin, and Derek Barrett. Michelle's aunt was devastated and deeply worried. She explained that she had been away for work and had no idea where Michelle could have gone. Her daughter, Michelle's cousin, also stated that she hadn't seen Michelle in days. However, Derek Barrett's statement raised suspicions. He claimed he hadn't seen Michelle for 2 days and suggested she might have been staying out with friends. He also mentioned that she had been going to nightclubs recently, subtly implying that she had an active social life that could explain her sudden absence. Police took note of Derek's statement, but something about his demeanor made them uneasy. His calmness in the face of Michelle's disappearance seemed unnatural. The detectives decided to look deeper into his background and movements. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found inconsistencies in Derek's story. They conducted a forensic examination of the apartment Michelle shared with her aunt, cousin, and Derek. At first glance, everything appeared normal, but closer inspection revealed traces of blood in Michelle's bedroom and bathroom. These findings were alarming, as there was no explanation for Michelle's blood being present in the apartment unless something terrible had happened to her inside. Detectives then analyzed Derek Barrett's phone records. What they uncovered further increased their suspicions. His phone had been in the vicinity of Snapper Point in the early hours of April 24th, the same location where Michelle's body was discovered. When confronted with this information, Derek denied ever being there. However, surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed a man matching Derek's description, refueling his car, and buying drinks on the way to Snapper Point. The mounting evidence left no doubt that Derek had lied to the police. With his inconsistencies, the blood traces in the apartment, and his phone records placing him at the crime scene, investigators had enough reason to consider him their primary suspect. As the investigation intensified, forensic specialists analyzed Derek's phone and discovered something disturbing. They managed to retrieve deleted files, including videos and photos that provided chilling insight into his actions before Michelle's murder. Among them were videos of Michelle in the shower, clearly taken without her knowledge, and even more disturbing images of Michelle bound and terrified. This evidence changed the course of the investigation. What had initially seemed like a disappearance and possible homicide now revealed something even more sinister. Michelle had been held captive, tormented, and ultimately killed by someone she lived with, Derek Barrett. With irrefutable evidence in hand, police arrested Derek Barrett on multiple charges, including unlawful imprisonment, secret videotaping, and the murder of Michelle Leng. When interrogated, Derek initially denied any involvement, but as detectives laid out the evidence against him, he changed his approach. He claimed to have memory lapses and blamed drug use for his inability to recall key details. However, the forensic evidence spoke louder than his excuses. Investigators pieced together the horrifying timeline of events. On the night of April 21st, after Michelle returned home from her outing, Derek attacked her. He tied her up, gagged her, and took photos of her in distress. He kept her captive for hours, during which she suffered unimaginable horror. Forensic experts concluded that Michelle had been restrained for at least several hours before she was killed. On April 22nd, Derek's stepdaughter came home for a few hours, completely unaware that Michelle was being held captive in the next room. At some point, Derek brutally attacked Michelle, stabbing her over 30 times. The nature of the injuries indicated that Michelle fought back desperately. However, she was ultimately overpowered and murdered. The following day, Derek took extreme measures to clean up the crime scene. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the apartment 4 times to dispose of trash bags, presumably containing evidence of his crime. He then waited until the early hours of April 24th before driving to Snapper Point, where he discarded Michelle's body into the water. After hearing this gruesome account, Michelle's mother, Mei Jong-el, was overcome with grief. She had sent her daughter to Australia for a better future, never imagining she would meet such a tragic fate at the hands of someone within her own family's circle. Derek Barrett's trial began in October 2017. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including the disturbing videos, the surveillance footage, and the forensic findings. The case painted a horrifying picture of a predator who had meticulously planned his actions. During the trial, a psychiatrist evaluated Derek and determined that he was fully responsible for his actions. Despite his claims of memory loss and a troubled childhood, there was no medical evidence to support his defense. In court, Derek showed little emotion, sitting with his head down and barely reacting as the prosecution described the unspeakable suffering he had inflicted on Michelle. The judge condemned Derek's actions as cold-blooded and calculated. Michelle's mother, who had traveled from China for the trial, delivered an emotional victim impact statement, pleading for justice. She described the unbearable pain of losing her only daughter and how her family had been shattered by the tragedy. She requested that Derek be sentenced to life in prison. Ultimately, in December 2017, Derek Barrett was sentenced to 46 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 34 years and 6 months. This meant that he would not be eligible for release until at least 2050. Detective Chief Inspector Gary Jubilin, who had led the investigation, welcomed the lengthy sentence, stating that justice had been served, although no punishment could undo the immense pain caused to Michelle's family. However, Michelle's mother was not satisfied. She believed that Derek deserved a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And while the case seemed to have reached its conclusion, it would later take another shocking turn when new evidence emerged in 2021, leading to an even more damning sentence. With Derek Barrett sentenced to 46 years in prison, the community and Michelle's loved ones tried to process the immense tragedy. While the court had delivered a severe punishment, the pain of Michelle's brutal murder lingered. Her mother, Mei Jiang-el, was devastated, expressing that no sentence could ever truly bring justice for what happened to her only daughter. The Chinese community in Sydney held vigils in Michelle's memory, remembering her as a bright young woman with a promising future. As media coverage of the case continued, details of Derek Barrett's disturbing actions became public knowledge. People were horrified to learn about the hidden cameras he had installed in the apartment and the secret videos he had taken of Michelle. These revelations raised concerns about how predators could live undetected within families, manipulating trust while committing heinous crimes. The case became a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic predators and the importance of vigilance, even within seemingly safe environments. Despite the guilty verdict, Derek remained emotionless throughout the sentencing. He showed no remorse, no regret, and no acknowledgement of the suffering he had caused. This lack of remorse deeply angered Michelle's family and the prosecution team, reinforcing their belief that he was a cold and calculated predator. In 2021, years after Barrett's initial conviction, new forensic analysis and digital investigations uncovered additional evidence. Police had continued monitoring Barrett in prison, reviewing his past behaviors and any materials that had been missed during the original trial. What they found was even more disturbing than previously known. Authorities uncovered additional deleted files on Barrett's electronic devices, showing that he had an extensive history of stalking and secretly recording women. Among the recovered footage were videos of other victims, including women who had never reported any crimes against them. Investigators now suspected that Michelle was not Barrett's only victim. She was simply the one who had suffered the worst fate. These discoveries raised questions about whether Barrett had committed other offenses that had gone undetected. Detectives reopened investigations into his past, reaching out to women who had previously lived near him or interacted with him. Some women came forward with stories of how Barrett had made them uncomfortable, but they had never suspected he was capable of such violence. Additionally, forensic experts re-examined the evidence from Michelle's murder. They found traces of additional substances in Michelle's system that suggested Barrett might have drugged her before attacking her. This information had not been fully explored in the first trial, as it had initially been dismissed as possible contamination. However, the new analysis strengthened the case against Barrett, proving that his actions had been even more premeditated than originally thought. This shocking revelation prompted the prosecution to push for a review of Barrett's sentence. They believed that the new evidence warranted a harsher punishment and that Michelle's case needed to be revisited to reflect the full extent of Barrett's crimes. With the new evidence in hand, the case was brought back to court in 2022. Prosecutors argued that Barrett's original sentence of 46 years with a non-parole period of 34 years was insufficient given the extent of his crimes. They presented the newly discovered videos and forensic findings, painting an even more disturbing picture of Barrett's predatory behavior. Michelle's mother, Mei Jiang-el, traveled from China once again to attend the hearings. She had already endured years of pain, but she was determined to see her daughter's killer receive the maximum possible sentence. During the proceedings, she gave another emotional statement, describing how her life had been shattered and how she lived every day with the grief of losing Michelle. She pleaded with the court to ensure that Barrett would never be released. The judges carefully reviewed the new evidence, acknowledging that it significantly altered the understanding of Barrett's crimes. They agreed that his original sentence did not fully reflect the severity of his actions. As a result, Barrett's sentence was increased to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This final verdict brought some measure of relief to Michelle's family and supporters. Though nothing could bring Michelle back, knowing that her murderer would never walk free again provided a sense of justice. The ruling also set a precedent for similar cases. showing that crimes of this nature would be met with the harshest possible punishment. In the years following Barrett's conviction, Michelle's case became a significant point of discussion in legal and social justice circles. Advocates pushed for stricter laws regarding hidden cameras, stalking, and domestic abuse. The case highlighted the need for better protective measures for women, especially international students who might lack strong local support systems. Universities and advocacy groups launched campaigns to educate young women about personal safety and recognizing signs of predatory behavior. Michelle's story became a warning about the dangers that could exist even in familiar environments. Her friends and supporters worked to keep her memory alive, organizing scholarship programs in her name to support young women pursuing education in Australia. For Michelle's mother, the pain never truly faded. Though justice had been served, she continued to mourn her daughter every day. She returned to China, carrying with her only memories of Michelle and the heartbreaking reality that she had lost her child in the most tragic way possible. Despite the sorrow, Michelle's case led to meaningful change. It served as a powerful reminder of the importance of justice, awareness, and vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals from predators like Derek Barrett. Her legacy lived on through the conversations, policies, and movements that emerged in the wake of her tragic death. After Derek Barrett's final sentencing to life imprisonment, forensic psychologists and criminal experts examined his case in greater detail. They sought to understand what drove a seemingly ordinary man to commit such a brutal and calculated crime. Investigations into Barrett's past revealed troubling patterns of behavior that hinted at his capacity for violence long before Michelle's murder. Experts noted that Barrett exhibited traits commonly found in psychopathic individuals, including a lack of remorse, a manipulative personality, and a deep sense of entitlement. He had a history of controlling behavior, particularly in relationships, and displayed an obsessive need to dominate those around him. The secret cameras he installed and the hidden videos he recorded showed that he derived pleasure from violating others' privacy and exerting power over them. Psychologists also analyzed Barrett's reaction during the trial. His cold demeanor, refusal to acknowledge guilt, and lack of visible emotion further supported the idea that he lacked empathy. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, he never showed signs of regret or sorrow for Michelle's brutal murder. Instead, he maintained a detached attitude, as if the entire trial was nothing more than an inconvenience. This psychological assessment raised concerns about other potential victims. While no additional murders were linked to him, authorities strongly suspected that Michelle was not his first victim of abuse. They urged any past acquaintances who may have had similar experiences with Barrett to come forward. This case reinforced the importance of recognizing red flags in predatory behavior before it escalates to violence. Michelle's case sent shockwaves through the Chinese community in Australia, particularly among international students. Many young Chinese students came to Australia with hopes of a bright future, just as Michelle had, but her tragic fate made them acutely aware of the dangers they could face while living abroad. The incident became a wake-up call for international students to be more cautious and vigilant. Universities and student organizations responded by implementing new safety initiatives. They introduced programs aimed at educating students about personal security, recognizing signs of toxic relationships, and knowing where to seek help. Helplines were established specifically for international students, offering support in multiple languages, including Mandarin, to help those who felt isolated or vulnerable. In Sydney, members of the Chinese community organized events in Michelle's memory, advocating for stronger protections for international students. Discussions about gender-based violence, domestic abuse, and cyber surveillance increased, helping to bring awareness to issues that had previously been overlooked. Michelle's story became a catalyst for positive change, encouraging students to look out for one another and report suspicious behavior. The Chinese government also took notice of the case, raising concerns about the safety of their citizens studying abroad. Diplomatic discussions between China and Australia touched on the need for better security measures and legal protections for international students. Michelle's tragic death highlighted the vulnerabilities that many foreign students faced, particularly young women living alone in unfamiliar environments. In the wake of Michelle's case, lawmakers in Australia revisited laws concerning privacy violations, domestic violence, and cyber surveillance. Advocacy groups pushed for stricter penalties for crimes involving hidden cameras and unauthorized recordings, arguing that such invasions of privacy often escalate into more serious crimes. One of the major legal reforms that emerged was the introduction of harsher punishments for those caught secretly filming or tracking individuals without their consent. Before Michelle's case, penalties for such offenses were relatively lenient, but her story demonstrated the real dangers of allowing these behaviors to go unchecked. Additionally, discussions about domestic violence laws gained momentum. Michelle's case was cited as an example of how domestic abuse does not always involve physical violence at first. Many abusers start with psychological control, surveillance, and manipulation before escalating to physical harm. As a result, authorities began focusing on early intervention strategies to help potential victims before their situations became life-threatening. Several women who had previously encountered Barrett spoke out about their experiences, revealing that he had displayed predatory behavior long before he met Michelle. Their testimonies emphasized the need for better tracking of repeat offenders and stronger protective measures for potential victims. These revelations further reinforced the call for changes in how authorities handle stalking and harassment cases. Nonprofit organizations also launched awareness campaigns, educating people about recognizing the warning signs of abusive relationships. They provided resources for those in dangerous situations, ensuring that victims had access to support networks and legal assistance. Michelle's case became a symbol of why society must take all forms of abuse seriously, even those that may initially seem minor. Years after Michelle's tragic murder, her story continued to impact people around the world. Her family, friends, and supporters worked tirelessly to ensure that she was remembered not just as a victim, but as a bright young woman whose life was cut short by an evil act. In China, Michelle's mother, Mei Jiang-el, established a foundation in her daughter's name to support young women pursuing education abroad. The foundation provided scholarships and safety resources for international students, helping them navigate the challenges of studying in a foreign country. Mei Jiang-el also became an advocate for victims of violence, using her platform to spread awareness about the dangers of domestic abuse and cyber surveillance. Back in Australia, Michelle's friends and classmates continued to honor her memory through annual gatherings and fundraising events. Universities implemented programs that focused on student safety, ensuring that Michelle's story remained a reminder of the importance of vigilance and support for vulnerable individuals. Although Michelle's life was tragically cut short, the impact of her case led to meaningful change. Laws were strengthened, awareness increased, and communities came together to protect future generations. Her legacy served as a powerful reminder that justice must always be pursued, and that society must remain vigilant in the fight against violence and exploitation. Michelle's memory lived on, not just in the legal reforms and social movements she inspired, but in the hearts of those who loved her. Her story, though heartbreaking, became a force for good, pushing the world to be a little safer, a little more aware, and a little more just.